Sean Simon, S&D.
Thank you, Madam President, and can I join the congratulations to my regional colleague, Mrs McIntyre. I don't agree with her report, but it is admirably concise and clear, as she always is, and they are admirable qualities. One of the things that I've learned in the relatively short time that I've been in the European Parliament is that the English phrase to call a spade can be rendered in French, appeler un chat un chat. And I was reminded of this by Mrs McIntyre's phrase, given that Mr Timmermans is a socialist, ... And I think it's worth us saying now, we socialists, that that's not going to wash over time. There is an endless philosophical argument to be had about whether Mr Timmermans is or was a socialist, and whether what Mr Timmermans is doing is or not socialist, and the relation between whether or not what Mr Timmermans is doing and whether or not Mr Timmermans is or was are endless and fascinating, but ultimately pointless and frustrating. I think it's clear enough to those of us on this side who do think of ourselves as socialists that a lot of what Mr Timmermans seems to be doing doesn't seem very socialist to us. And it's also not the case that the simplification that he talks about, he tells us that it's not deregulation but simplification. And Mrs McIntyre is very clear about simplification in her very concise and simple report. It's not so simple as that simply by simplifying one improves. And it's not always the case. The world is not so constructed solely that there are small businesses overburdened with complexity, and if we remove the complexity, then the world becomes better for them. There are, for instance, very big businesses whose stock in trade is the manufacture and promulgation of layer upon layer upon layer of complexity, which they use to their own ends and to the very considerable disbenefit of the people that work for them. Look at the abuse of the Agency Workers Directive. Simplicity is not the problem. It is precisely complication that is the problem. And an entire programme that is founded on the notion that by simplifying we can improve is legislatively, I would contend, somewhere between simplistic and illiterate. More specifically, the stuff that's left out, the revision of the Carcinogens Directive left out, musculoskeletal diseases, the hairdressers agreement thrown out. This isn't good legislation, this isn't simplification, this isn't improvement, this is just the abrogation of a significant amount of consensus that's been built up over a long time by a lot of people in these institutions, by social partners and others. And I don't think it's as clever as Mr Timmermans seems to think it is. And while I understand Mrs McIntyre's admirable report, I do think that it needs a rethink.